Hi, this is Rebecca Pohlmeyer with Set 4 of my book critiques for EDU 318. I read lots of great books this week that I can't wait to share with you, so let's get started. My first text, my feature text, is Audacity by Melanie Crowder. This is an informational text written in verse, so I've classified it here as being poetry. The reading level is above 12 years. Audacity is inspired by a real woman named Clara. She's a young Jewish immigrant from Russia to America, and she comes from a family with very traditional views regarding women's role and education. So when she and her family arrive in New York and Clara is the one who has to support her family by working in a sweatshop, it's a little bit of a culture shift. In the sweatshop, she experiences firsthand the horrific working conditions of women and children, and she becomes one of the leaders in the fight for workers' rights and female unions. I chose this book because of the beautiful poetry, the style that's so engaging it's one of those books you don't want to put down, as well as the history that's included. Sometimes workers' rights or creation of unions is something that can get glossed over in history class, so if we introduce our students to this in novel format, that would be just an amazing way to get that history into their hands. My first lesson for this text is a poetry writing workshop and publishing activity. This is an 8th grade English language arts lesson, and it aligns with the standards from Virginia that talk about how the student will need to read and analyze a variety of texts, including poetry, and explain the use of figurative language. In the lesson, students will engage in critical thinking as they discuss parts of the text that make it engaging and what makes the poetry unique. They'll collaborate with peers and a presenter as they participate in a virtual poetry workshop, and they'll create their own poem focusing on elements of concrete poetry and will have the opportunity to publish their completed work. So what is concrete poetry? Here's an example on the left. Do you see how the letters in the words swooping and diving and separating are doing those actions? So concrete poetry is basically just how the typography, the physical makeup of the letters on the page, help enhance the meaning of the words. So here's another example here with books. This part in the poem in Audacity is talking about how the books were lined up on the library shelves. So you can see how the words books are lined up like library books would be on shelves. So students will discuss this, and they can learn more about it at poetryfoundation.org. After this, they'll engage in a poetry writing workshop with a published poet named Carla Kuskin, and this is a 4-part workshop from scholastic.com. It's a free resource for teachers and students, and I really want to point out here step 4 in the workshop, which is publishing online. Students, after they create their poem, will actually have the opportunity to submit their final products for publishing at scholastic.com, which is an amazing experience for students to be able to have, and will definitely get them sharing their work with a wide audience. My second lesson is an interactive timeline, which is an American history lesson. Again, this is for 8th grade and aligns with some more Virginia standards about the impact of the progressive movement on child labor, working conditions, women's suffrage, etc. In the lesson, students will engage in critical thinking as they do research. They'll collaborate with their peers as they organize their research, and then they'll use an interactive timeline to communicate what they've learned. So like I said, Audacity is written about a real woman's life named Clara Lemlich and how she inspired the uprising of the 20,000 to strike for women's rights and for really workers' women's rights. So female workers' rights. You can learn more about this at pbslearningmedia.org, which is an incredible resource that I found that has lots of information about all sorts of different topics. Students will share their research creating a Sutori timeline. This is my artifact that you can see on the screen. This is an interactive timeline and included pictures and links and comments, and videos, etc. So students will create one of these, and then they'll be able to share it in what I'm envisioning to be like a social studies science fair, so a social studies fair, where students will be able to share their research, and this is just one of the things that they could choose to present at this social studies fair, social studies expo. Moving on to the other texts I read Owl Moon by Jane Yolen, which is a picture book. It has beautiful watercolor illustrations about a little girl and her father as they go owling one winter night. Bridge to Terabithia, which I had never read before this week, and I'm so glad I did. It's one of those books that everyone tells you to read, and I just haven't had the chance to do it yet. So this is about a young boy and a girl and their unlikely friendship, and the tragedy that eventually comes out of that friendship. Definitely recommend reading this book. Ruby Holler was one of my favorites, if not my favorite, for this set, about two twins and how they find a loving home with an adventurous couple. And finally, Last Stop on Market Street, which is a Newbery and Caldecott winning book about a little boy and his Nana as they take the bus to serve food at a soup kitchen. Ending with another quote here by Clara Lemlich, the woman who inspired Audacity. Audacity. That was all I had. Audacity. I love this because as teachers, we should be inspiring our students to have the courage to have audacity. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening.